Hello, welcome to Dakota News Now Online. I'm digital content producer Mo Hurley, and today I am talking with Dave Price. He is the Gray TV Iowa political director, and we're talking about the presidential debate that happened last night. So I will send it to Dave to share his thoughts and an overview of what he saw.
Hi, everybody. Obviously, it was an historic presidential debate last night, right? I mean, let's start with some of the obvious uniqueness of this. You have a current president debating a former president. They're both, no disrespect, but they're both elderly men. So you have that whole dynamic of the age, which brought in all kinds of additional questions to this. And this is also an election that polls will show that a lot of people, frankly, don't want. They don't want these two men to be their big two choices, if you will. Again, you can find a lot of people who really, really like Joe Biden and who really, really like Donald Trump. So for those folks who aren't so hot on either one of these two, the question now, today, and going forward is, did anything happen last night to either push you toward or push you away these two men? Let's start with the president, Joe Biden. Clearly, so many of the headlines today are about his performance. And right or wrong, in a televised debate, much of this is about performance rather than the actual policies and the substance. For Joe Biden, when you see some of these focus groups and some of these public opinion polls, especially in key battleground states, the issue of his age, his mental fitness, those things have been coming up for quite some time. Democrats have pushed back on this. They have said that he is sharp, he's not lost a step, all those kind of things. Republicans will point to different videos that are out there where he stumbles. His gait is not what it used to be when he's walking, for example. But, and he's a lifelong stutterer, too. We saw that when he campaigned through the Midwest back when he ran. He's run two different times for president, but especially this last one in the 2020 cycle. He talked about his stuttering. And when he gets tired, he stutters more. And people who have severe stuttering, like the president apparently has, will talk about some of the same things. But one of his big challenges going into last night's debate was to reassure people that despite the fact that he's in his early 80s, he's up to the job. This is a 4-year commitment. So this reelection would push him well into his mid 80s. And there is a sizable chunk of the American population, the potential voters here, who were uncomfortable with this and they had questions. Well, watching that 90-minute debate last night, they likely don't feel better about this if they had concerns going into this. There were moments, one of them was very early on in this debate, where the president seemed to lose his train of thought, kind of looked down, and there was just uncomfortable silence. And then he said something about Medicare, which didn't make any sense. There was not a live audience in the room. And if you remember the rules of this, the other candidate's microphone was shut down. So it's pretty much just on President Biden. They had that split screen so you could see former President Donald Trump sometimes, and he would kind of look over at him. No matter how you slice this, this was an uncomfortable time for Democrats. And I was messaging back and forth both during the debate and after the debate last night with some prominent Democrats who've been involved in campaign for years. The way the state of Iowa is right now, there aren't a lot of prominent elected Democrats in office because of the way the state has switched. So there are no members of Congress in Iowa who are Democrats, for example, none of the 6. So you're talking about operatives and former politicians, those kind of things. But there's nobody out there saying that this was a good night for Joe Biden, of anybody that I've talked to. And so there's a lot of concern. And that's why you're seeing these national headlines and conversations today about whether Joe Biden should step aside. It's super uncomfortable for the party, right? Joe Biden is the current president. So out of deference to a current president, traditionally, typically, they get to run again if they choose to run again. You go back to 1968 when Lyndon Johnson decided he didn't want to, but was getting pressure for those who were around back then. to not run again, so he didn't run again. Richard Nixon had drama, obviously, when he was the Republican president and had all kinds of criminal things he was dealing with and impeachment and all kinds of stuff. So a different situation. But this is a very tough spot for Democrats right now, and tough for the president and his family. They will have to decide, should he keep going? Is he up for the job? Was last night just some kind of terrible, terrible night? Was he sick? Was that why he had such a poor performance? Or is it something that he's a man in his early 80s, and while he was the Democrat who beat Donald Trump and got Trump out of office, should he no longer be in office? Should he not run again? That's a tough conversation. Kamala Harris, the vice president, who has not had really a prominent role in the Biden administration for these 3.5 years. She had a very short presidential campaign herself in 2019 and then quit before the Iowa caucuses even got here. Her defense of the president last night may have been her strongest moment in politics. Not to overstate this, but she was in a really, really, really tough spot. She did a live interview on CNN and talked about that, wasn't a good debate for the president, but she has worked with him for 3.5 years, and this comes down to policies. Biden's policies are much better for the country compared to Donald Trump. So that may have made Democrats feel better, especially feel better if the president would step aside and not run again, and the vice president would potentially be their nominee. It brings up all kinds of issues, and it also makes the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in August potentially a lot more significant here if the president would actually decide that he's not going to run again. Some of this would be a very unique situation, but in theory, they could go to this convention in August and delegates could choose another nominee. It's a complicated process, and those stories will be told in the next weeks ahead here. But I mean, that's how dramatic all of this is. So let's see how this plays out. People have to kind of take a breath and process all this. Now, on the other side of things, did Donald Trump do anything at all to help his standing with people other than looking better in this debate visually, and the audio side of this too, I guess, compared to Joe Biden? Fact checkers are going through all kinds of things the former president said that were incorrect. And that's his thing. The biggest thing, obviously, is to say they keep saying that fraud is the reason he wasn't reelected as president, which that has been, the courts have ruled dozens of times that that's not been the case. But he's convinced millions of people that despite the evidence here, that something nefarious happened, and that's why he's not in office. But if you're going for factual statements last night, there are lists of things fact checkers are going to go through and say so many things where Trump has exaggerated things or taken one thing that might be true and then put his spin on it that makes it untrue. So that's what Democrats are trying to point to say, yes, Biden had a bad night, but Trump said all kinds of lies again and again and again. That's who this guy is. He's a convicted felon. He fired up all his supporters on January 6, 2021 before the riot at the Capitol. And if you watched the debate, you saw how he kind of transitions off the subject about, is he going to pardon some of these people? He kind of has this nebulous, unclear thing that he says about pardoning January 6th. He calls them prisoners. Well, is he talking about the people that were bludgeoning law enforcement, which was kind of one of those moments for many in the American population thinking this was just a horrific, horrific day, regardless of whether they were disappointed that Trump lost the election. But he whooped these people up. They went in there, some of them, and then bludgeoned some of these law enforcement officers. And then we've seen some law enforcement officers pass away afterwards, which their families say, had something to do with what happened January 6th. So that was a serious, serious moment. Having said that, did Joe Biden do anything to convince people to discount Trump? Like on that debate stage, did he do anything to really push that through? So I think there are a lot of questions going forward about what this would be. I mean, Trump is Trump. The American people already know who he is, how he behaves. He's still got some criminal trials ahead of him. So maybe that throws some more wrinkles into this. But as we sit here on a Friday trying to look at all of this, I think it's important that we don't don't try to make rash decisions and jump to conclusions about things. But without a doubt, there are conversations all over the place with prominent Democrats who are kind of freaked out about the performance last night. So if Joe Biden is going to continue in this race and run again, they have their work cut out to convince people that this was somehow just a terrible, terrible performance and that he is still up to the job, despite what you saw last night and in other videos where he gets confused and mixes stuff up. And I get it. Democrats say, hey, Trump says all kinds of stuff that's not true and gets confused and mixes up Obama and Biden, all kinds of stuff. Yes, all those things too. For Democrats, they have to focus on, can they beat Donald Trump with Joe Biden? And is Joe Biden up for the job of doing this for another 4+ years? So this may end up being a very meaningful debate. There's only one more of these things scheduled. It's in September if it goes forward like it's planned right now. And it was kind of unusual that this thing that they just did last night happened in June. So it was really, really early. But clearly people are talking about it today, and we'll see what the impact of all of this is as we move forward, Mo.